to Elaine to get us started and introduce the event.
Yeah, thanks, Avery. Recording's all good?
Yes, it should be all good.
Great. Great. Hi, everyone. My name's Elaine Zmuda. I am a member of Feminist Spatial Practices, and I'm really excited to share this new event series that we've started with you. We're calling this Threads Through the Tapestry. And our first theme for this first iteration of the event is going to be landscape and ecology, but we'll go over a little bit of what this event entails as well. So. So Threads Through the Tapestry is a new series to activate our archive, which if you've ever been on Feminist Spatial Practices website, that's the first thing you see, an archive of feminist spatial practices that we've collected over the years. This is a living archive, and so we want to have these events as a chance to further activate it and explore it more, to start to reveal patterns and connections throughout the archive, and to invite new voices into them, and to hopefully also spur more people to begin to contribute more to the archive. And to start that, Avery is going to share a little bit more about the history of the tapestry, as she was one of the first people to help start it.
Yeah, awesome. So you can scan the QR code here if you want to explore the tapestry or the original sort of diagram that led to this amazing community being created. So this is called Feminist Spatial Practices Part 1, where Bryony Roberts and I produced this diagram. It was a chronogram of feminist practices from the 1960s until now in the future. And we tried to document 500 practitioners, artists, collaboratives all over the world throughout time that were embodying feminist spatial practices. And from then, we have created this amazing community of people. We have celebrated all of the folks that are within this diagram, and we continue to do programming even today. So, shout out to Bryony, who's here today, and to everyone else who has been here from even the origins of this original map. But we were really trying to build this landscape of feminist practices. That's the sort of cool topography that you see here. But if you keep going, Elaine, we can start to see how this has evolved and emerged and changed over time. You can see some of the cool programming that we've done. So since that original map, hundreds of people all over the world have joined us to do virtual programming, in-person collaborations, where we make fun poofs and we diagram together and collage and world build what a feminist future really looks like. And so this is just a screenshot of a couple things that we've done in the last 3 years, and there's still more fun to come and more fun that's not even documented here. But it's been an amazing journey so far. And and then because we have this growing community, we've started to emerge and figure out who we are and what we stand for. And so we have these core values that are also posted on our website, but we really want to celebrate and bring together feminist practices and practitioners across the world and celebrate the diversity of what feminism is, which you'll see some iterations of today through threads through the tapestry. We acknowledge that feminism is intersectional, and we all are working against these hierarchies of power and oppressive forces that are really trying to separate all of us and all of the work that we're all doing. So we try to create this really welcoming community that's centered on care and equity and co-creation. And so we're excited that you all are joining us today. And I put in the chat, and I'll put it again later, if you want to join us in this community, in even just attending more events like this, or helping us grow our community and do more programming like this, we welcome you all to be a participant and join us. But all of this has truly led to us creating an interactive platform, because we don't want to just we want to celebrate all of these practices and then create accessibility so everyone can know about all of the amazing practitioners and work that's going on all over the world. And so this has led to us creating an online platform that Elaine is going to talk about in a second.
Yes. So this is the page that you'll find on Feminist Spatial Practices website. You can scan this QR code and it will take you to this. And so this is the archive, and you can see it kind of mirrors that conogram that Avery was sharing earlier, where you see these, I want to call them like geologic striations almost of these different practices, and it's organized by theme and time. And we zoom in a bit more, there's actually multiple scales of interaction. So there's the dynamic soup, we call, where you see kind of all the practices mixed together. There's a lot of blurry boundaries. And then if you actually zoom in, you start to see more details on each of the entries and how they kind of mix together. And then if you actually click on an entry, you get more information about it. And this is where we would invite you to begin to contribute. So on the website, again, if you click on the little uh, menu, you understand what the tapestry is, and you can see an index of all the practices listed in a different way and directions on how to use it. And you can also see this last option to submit entries. And we would love it, everyone, to submit anything that they recognize as a feminist spatial practice. You can pick how you want to categorize it and share links on that. And it's something that we can then add to the tapestry. And so in that vein, this event that we're hosting, Threads Through the Tapestry, in addition to exploring the tapestry more, it's a chance for us to continue to grow the tapestry. So we've asked our guests, who I'll introduce in a minute, to look through the tapestry and pull out some practices that they see as like a thread where they can tell a story across time or across themes, and um, kind of continue that story by adding another entry, which we'll have in our archive shortly after this event. And so with that, we will start with our first theme for our first Threads Through the Tapestry, which is landscape and ecology. Joining us, we have Dr. Rose Monacella and Kari Roynesdal. And I'll let them introduce themselves more, but they're both amazing practitioners, designers, educators, and have different or they're both involved in landscape, but have different ways of engaging with it. And we also want to have this event be as participatory as possible. So we do have this Figma board where you'll be able to see the different slides that are going to be shared, and you can comment, add notes, post links. This is just another way that we can begin to explore what these archives, these practices are. And so with that, can start with Kari. I will let you take it over.
Thank you, Elaine and Avery, and everyone at FSP for inviting me. Excited to be a part of the first Threads event. So, hi everyone, my name's Kari. For this talk, I'm going to pull two threads from the FSP archive and from my own research, thinking through feminist critiques of care, maintenance, and progress, and kind of how those critiques might extend into landscape and ecology. Next slide. And I want to begin with a recent quotation that I read from author Lauren Birds Cody, where she states, "Plant life operates at temporal, spatial, and material magnitudes far beyond human norms, generously pointing us toward more flexible, expansive schemas. If we can resist the urge to submit to an old habit of fixing knowledge in place, we are likely to be rewarded with conceptually rich and inspired new views of our shared world and of ourselves." And this quote really strikes me in two ways, kind of the magnitude of plant and non-human life forms, and then the restraint that's indicated here. Plant life operates at scales and temporalities beyond us, and yet we kind of repeatedly attempt to fix them, manage them, define, and optimize them. Next slide. Feminist spatial practice has long questioned productivity, control, and sole authorship. But what happens when we kind of extend that critique beyond human social systems into landscape ecology itself? To explore what that might look like, I'll use two lenses, the spatial and the temporal, kind of pulling threads from each toward what I see as the beginnings of a kind of feminist landscape ecology. These threads aren't, in my mind, aesthetic preferences. They're more political conditions that work in opposition to discourses that have really dominated the field of ecology in service of very anthropocentric goals. So next slide, I'll begin with space. So how landscapes are organized, maintained, and governed. Documented by Joel Sternfeld's photographs, the High Line was once inhabited by burgeoning forests of vegetation that spontaneously emerged, a self-sustaining urban ecology which for decades allowed for queer communities to occupy an urban space that was largely unknown to most New Yorkers, and long before it became a tourism spectacle and a driver of neoliberal development. So in this time of abandonment, birds and high winds began to disperse seeds, which grew into a weedy, unintended ecosystem. And this was where nearly 75 species of plants ultimately inhabited the tracks. The High Line was unmanaged, unprogrammed, and unclear in ownership. And in many ways, the reason it was ultimately preserved was because of the richness that emerged when it was left alone, which sprouted inspiration in the people who came to discover it, who then advocated for its preservation and its transformation into a public park. Once redevelopment began, planting became curated and highly maintained. Sightlines were opened, lighting installed, circulation clarified, and maintenance kind of is often presented as a neutral necessity, and it's not that all maintenance is harmful, and as landscape architects and designers, this is a key part of our role. But human stewardship kind of frequently positions itself as the sole guarantor of ecological success, as though flourishing depends upon this kind of constant intervention. Um, and so this kind of explores the idea that maintenance is a political choice. It really determines who stays, who is visible, which ecologies are allowed to persist. Um, but what happens if we allow certain conditions to persist without immediately correcting them? Does all care require intervention? So pulling a thread from the archive is a group called Ecologies of Care, initiated by Elke Kresny and Erska German in 2021. Members of the group practice long-term engagement with sites and infrastructures under multiple pressures. Um, and as outlined by the archive, Ecologies of Care brings together feminist spatial practices of maintenance and repair, multi-species ethics, critical heritage studies, as well as feminist infrastructural critique, among others, to kind of aspire to new public imaginaries of care. And they have this study of what's called the Floating University in Berlin, which is a rainwater retention basin repurposed as a nature culture learning lab, where they examine tensions between maintenance authorities and the university association, which had reactivated this basin as a kind of cultural and ecological space. Um, what was happening was a spontaneous reed bed was one day discovered in the basin. It had terraformed the basin's center and was acting as a natural water filter. And this basin was intended to be an experimental learning lab, kind of hybrid stormwater infrastructure. So the university kind of welcomed this new actor and advocated for it to stay. And then maintenance authorities kind of violently uprooted it. They were citing contamination concerns and subjected it to an exhaustive cleansing process. So here, maintenance became discipline in the name of state-sanctioned kind of harm mitigation. Next slide. And then in my own work, I saw a similar dynamic in a park in Copenhagen called Årstedsparken or Årsteds Park. Overgrown thickets and dense plantings historically functioned as cruising grounds for queer communities. Over time, park authorities cut back vegetation, transformed shrubby undergrowth into open lawns, and increased lighting in the name of safety and proper use, to which activists responded and fought back, using planting as protest and claiming the rights to occupy public space. So the removal of kind of undesirable social behavior and the thinning of habitat occurred through the same maintenance act. In both cases, ecological experimentation and informal occupation were tolerated only temporarily, and when they exceeded institutional control, they were removed. And so, if we extend feminist critiques of labor and care and stewardship into landscape, we have to ask who defines what a healthy landscape looks like, and who decides when a landscape is too unruly. Non-human life is often treated as a kind of beneficiary, something that we manage, we steward, design for. But what happens when that non-human life is understood as a co-author with its own forms of agency, independent of human intention, and which kind of has the power to generate ecological richness that's beyond what we could imagine alone and kind of inspires these new worlds that we find really valuable. Next slide. So then if the spatial question is about how landscapes are managed, the temporal question is about how landscapes are really understood over time. Next slide. And so the archive thread I'm pulling from here is called Ecological Reparation, which explores practices of repairing damaged ecologies across different geographies, and offers insights into conservation, mending, care, and empowerment of human and non-human ecologies. And I want to take a look at some of their work through this frame of temporality. One chapter examines industrial peat bog extraction in Ireland's Midlands, landscapes often framed as wastelands after being drained and transformed into productive territories. The authors challenge these linear narratives of progress that define bogs only in terms of economic value, and they surface alternative relations such as cultural attachments, commons-based energy practices, ecological care that persist despite colonial frameworks that deem these landscapes as invaluable. And here they ask, what does repair look like when plants require time spans that conflict with state timelines, and when multiple temporalities exist in tension, one that kind of justifies life that's still living in the bog, and then another that deems it obsolete. And so it's kind of asks, like, allows us to ask, like, how do you measure progress in landscapes? Is it through growth, kind of productivity, what is visible? Um, but I think it's curious to ask what happens when landscapes do not progress according to human time. And so there's another thread that I want to pull from my own research that explores this relationship further. Located in North London, there's a park cemetery called Abney Park, which has existed as an urban sanctuary since 1840, and it has a really unique ecological and nonconformist history. The park was established as a cemetery and an arboretum and contained more than 2,500 varieties of plants, including several species of veteran trees that still thrive in the park today. Next slide. In the 1970s, the park fell into decline and was largely unmanaged. What happened next was veteran trees decayed, ecologies that form in rotting wood, which are rare in urban settings, began to establish themselves. Rare species, including hoverflies not documented in London since the 1960s, and which are also extremely rare in Europe, were found in veteran ash trees in overgrown areas. And so here, decay, which could often be framed as failure, became a condition for rare species to establish themselves and thrive, and in a very unlikely location. Yet, here we also saw how management pressures and the interests of English heritage groups sought to restore order, thinning vegetation, increasing visibility, installing lighting, And we know from ecological research on habitat fragmentation and edge conditions how vital such zones are for biodiversity. Yet we started to see developers starting to install lighting at these edges, disrupting urban bat and night flying insect populations, while also sending a clear message to those who were like undesirable in the park and who sought refuge there, cruisers, unhoused individuals, about this kind of increased surveillance and visibility. Next slide. So pulling these two threads, I think there's a tension that's made clear. This idea of progress that is often ecologically violent. And when we impose linear human timescales, such as maintenance cycles, redevelopment plans, beautification campaigns, we interrupt these slower distributed processes. Um, Decay is not the absence of agency. We've seen it function as distributed agency, so time doing work beyond human authorship. And so a feminist temporal practice might refuse linear improvement. It might allow for pause and kind of recognize that ecological richness can emerge in these moments of suspended productivity. Um, Pause can become a condition for multi-species agency. Next slide. So across kind of space and time, what emerges? I think spatially, maintenance is always political. Care can be coercive. Stewardship is not always benevolent. And temporally, progress is not neutral. Decay is not failure. Pause is not neglect. And plant life operates beyond human norms. And so resisting the urge to fix landscapes in place may open new schemas of care. As a designer, I think this doesn't mean abandoning responsibility. I think it means maybe designing less and defending messiness and contradiction, creating frameworks that might allow for uncertainty, and considering that maintenance is not preservation of order, but a kind of ongoing negotiation of change, experimentation. Um, so as like a kind of feminist landscape ecology, it might ask us to loosen our grip kind of spatially and temporally, um, and allow other forms of life to co-author the world with us. Thank you.
Kari, that was great. And now have Rose's slides. Oh, sorry. Okay, here we go. Right, Rose, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Abri and Kari and the Feminist Spatial Practices team. It's an honor to join you today and be part of in conversation with this community. So maybe the best way to describe me is, firstly, I probably would describe myself as sort of entanglement of messy threads, literally. But I would say that I'm a faculty member in the boring sense. I'm a faculty member at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. But I'm an academic, but also a design research practitioner. I find that we often, in an academic environment, don't talk about design pedagogy, and what pedagogy actually, the agency of pedagogy, and then our role as academics in shaping and reshaping what it should be. So the focus for today, so I'll be talking about design pedagogies for a planetary student and how it challenges, or an attempt to challenge, the false binary between ecology and scientific legitimacy and design approaches, and proposing that a new ground is formed and opened to multiple epistemologies that embrace design as inseparable from an ethos of care. In this work, still very much in draft, messy entanglement, I'm exploring how an ethics of care and planetary relations is the disciplinary turn we need to consider. Next, please, Lily. So I initially draw on, there's 4 texts that I initially draw on, but also multiple threads from FSP. I draw on Van Schaik's 1990s paper on landscape architecture's relationship to techniques, Heathcote's recent article in the Financial Times, which is not dissimilar to Jacob's argument in Landscape, and Sonia Duperman's journal article in Places Journal, and that of the Pedagogies for a Broken World by JAE's journal. I delve into a broader range of pedagogical references and historical events, which you'll see sort of why I do that. But beginning with this quote by Van Schaik, "We hold our world in a vice-like grip, and it holds us tightly in return. We hold our world in a vice-like gaze, and that merciless stripping is returned manyfold. Presented with a new argument or new data, do you watch people twist and turn until they already know? Anyone outside the patriarchy, and usually we, are female, of colour, or gay, feel directly the pain of an analytical modes that dominate research and are continuously confounded by the spectacle of deconstructed logics picking over the carcass of some living system, classifying it into a pre-existing scheme. How things ought to be, never how they are." Landscape architecture's pedagogical crisis is not simply about defining what we do, but about examining how systems of knowledge production have fundamentally constrained what we're able to imagine. Next slide, please. So C.S. Holling's 1973 concept of the ecological resistance that haunts landscape architecture's disciplinary foundations today. As a disciplinary inquiry has tended toward evidence-based, risk-averse, fail-safe production, a widening gap has opened between design disciplinary approaches. Designing Landscape Architectural Education, which I co-edited with Bridget Keane during COVID, addresses this paradox through 30-plus studio case studies that refuse solutions and ideologies in favour of opening up possibilities, new ways of representing materials, and ecologies, novel cartographic and site-based methods, transdisciplinary entanglements of ecology, politics, and more than human agency. This work draws on, and the other bit of work that I'll be drawing on is the work of an exhibition held at the GSD last year that maps the historical development of the design studio pedagogy, embracing pluriversal knowledge integration, cultural interface pedagogy, relational design practices, critical time understandings, and collaborative design studio ecologies. Next, please. So starting on 2 legacies or 2 threads, Frederick Law Olmsted to the left, and his dual legacy in professionalisation and racialisation. His strategic adoption of the title architect elevated the field's prestige, but created a hierarchy that coded design as white professional work and landscape gardening as racialised manual labour. To the right, Helen Adelia Metcalfe founded RISD in 1877 after serving on the committee for Women's Pavilion at the 1876 Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. She persuaded the Rhode Island Women's Centennial Commission to invest their surplus funds in a co-educational school oriented toward the useful arts. RISD was founded by women decades before the women's suffrage, and its first ambition or first class was majority female. A parallel current in late 19th century design education driven by women's advocacy and industrial need, distinct from Olmstedian's professional model. Next, please. Drawing on Duperman's article, landscape architecture education enforced racial segregation. Throughout Reconstruction and the Jim Crow era, Black colleges were restricted to landscape gardening, gardens, rural and horticultural emphasis, while white institutions like Harvard developed professional design curricula rooted in Olmsted's urban and public work orientation. Booker T. Washington, Tuskegee's model offered a parallel but constrained path. The vocational framing challenged Black students into agricultural and horticultural training rather than professional design, reinforcing a split between who designs landscapes and who labours on them. Women and Indigenous students were similarly shaped by these hierarchies. Washington extended outdoor industrial training to women after visiting England's Swanley Horticultural College, while Hampton Institute enrolled Indigenous students as part of forced assimilation programs, embedding landscape education within white settler colonial logics. These racialized divisions persist, and Duppelman argues the Academy must confront how its confounding pedagogical structures continue to reproduce exclusion. Next slide, please. The Cambridge School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture originated when Catherine Brooks, a Radcliffe graduate, was refused entry to Harvard's architectural drafting courses. Professor Henry Atherton Frost tutored Brooks and a small group of women privately, a little experiment, in quotes, that grew into the first school offering women graduate training in architecture and landscape architecture under a single faculty. Building and landscape were considered a single design problem, and all students shared a broad first-year curriculum before specialising. The school affiliated with Smith College in 1934 to grant degrees after Harvard, Radcliffe and Columbia all refused. In 1942, Smith closed the program. The same year, women were first allowed into the Harvard GSD. A bitter irony underscoring how the school's existence had been necessitated by exclusion, and its closure entangled with the belated opening of an institution that refused women. Over 400 women graduated from its program or from its life. And then reading alongside Lowenthorpe, RISD, Tuskegee, and Hampton, the Cambridge School reveals a pattern. Excluded groups are repeatedly built alternative educational infrastructures that were absorbed or dissolved once dominant institutions grudgingly expanded access. Lowenthorpe School of Landscape Architecture for Women, just a year after Harvard established the first academic degree in landscape architecture, Judith Eleanor Motley Lowe founded Lowenthorpe in Groton, Massachusetts, a 17-acre campus where students physically created, maintained, and experienced their own designs across meadows, orchards, gardens, and greenhouses. Instruction focused on private residential design rather than public gardens. As such, work was considered most suitable for women, revealing how gendered assumptions shape not just access, but scope of professional ambition deemed appropriate. Ellen Shipman named the Dean of Women Landscape Architects by House and Garden in 1933, hired only Lowenthorpe graduates, though notably no women of colour appeared to have attended. In 1945, Lowenthorpe was absorbed into RISD, connecting Metcalfe's 1877 founding vision directly to formal landscape architecture pedagogy. Lowenthorpe illustrated both the progress and limits of women's entry into the profession. Access was open, but within the constrained domains, mirroring the broader gendered and racial hierarchies of the discipline. Next slide, please. So consider landscape architecture graduates in the near future. So moving to the more recent planetary student component. Strategically positioned at critical intersections of systemic change. Planetary landscape architecture graduates are deeply inspired to cultivate a world of generosity and hope through which multiple worlds can flourish together within Earth's interconnected systems. As students and then practitioners, they strive for equitable and just planetary futures. Next slide, please. The planetary world recognises the Earth as a complex, interconnected set of systems composed of multiple worlds and knowledge structures. Acknowledging diverse cosmologies, temporalities, and more than human relations, emphasising ethical responsibilities across boundaries of specimens, culture, and geographies. For the planetary student, the Earth cannot helpfully be regarded as single, globalised, and containable entity with a determinable future. These students embody a pluriversal knowledge, a pluriversal approach, skilled in navigating multiple knowledge systems and integrating diverse epistemologies, recognising that no single framework can adequately address complex planetary challenges. Next slide, please. So the planetary student research maps the full arc of landscape architecture education from 1857 to 2025, pairing an institutional timeline with critical bibliography of 48 texts inspired by the FSP. So the 48 texts are drawn from architecture, geography and anthropology, Indigenous science, media studies, art history and environmental humanities. The timeline traces pedagogical shifts from Olmsted and Olmsted's collaborative methodologies through agriculture, horticulture curricula, and the founding of women's schools, and the codification of the Beaux-Arts pedagogy, and McHugh's ecological revolution at Penn, to post-COVID hybrid learning and integration of decolonial, multi-species, and climate-centered frameworks. The critical texts are organized across 6 focus areas: knowledge domains, disciplinary lineages, interfacing with the planet and engaging with fieldwork, sensing and relational landscape, ethics, accountability, and advocacy, and collective formations and transdisciplinarity. Together, the timeline and bibliography reveal a discipline whose pedagogical structures have been shaped at every turn by exclusion of race, gender, and colonial epistemologies, and whose turn toward planetary thinking represents not an additive update, but a fundamental reckoning with those foundations. Next slide, please. So, through design pedagogies for the planetary student, a framework for reimagining landscape architecture education to address climate crises through pluralist knowledge approaches, I'm proposing that a new ground of design approaches cannot come from closing ranks. This responds to Heathcote's observation that design schools now produce provocations rather than necessarily solutions. But what if provocations were grounded in multiple epistemologies that could generate new forms of action? The planetary student is understood that local actions are always entangled within planetary systems, whose education prepares them to work across multiple knowledge domains rather than privileging singular epistemologies whose design works are necessarily collaborative and situated. Can we articulate design approaches accountable to the planetary urgency that embrace generosity, multiple ways of knowing, and design as legitimate knowledge? Can we transcend what Heathcote calls design's painful irony, an obsession with design in every form, while relinquishing its desire to change the world? Or will we remain trapped in the self-imposed coils of our chosen serpent, watching as more powerful disciplines claim the work that should be everyone's? Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. That was incredible. So we'd like to open up now for a discussion. And I guess I can start with a couple questions, but first I just want to share this QR code again. So this will take you to our Figma board where you'll see the slides presented today, and you have the option to comment on them and share your thoughts or ideas on things that they've inspired and called to your mind. But so this was fantastic. These are both amazing presentations. So just refreshing and fun to get to question the practices that many of us might just be doing in our daily lives in a new way. And so with that, I guess I want to start by asking both of you how you see the potential to use both archives and thinking through landscape as a way to shape spatial practices, feminist spatial practices, and just spatial practice more broadly.
Kari, do you want to go first?
Oh, sorry. I was trying to get the Figma board. Yeah, I mean, I think this was a really engaging practice and kind of understanding I think understanding these different threads through the archive. And this is kind of some research that I've been thinking about for many years and have kind of jumped in and out of as I've been holding different roles as a landscape designer. And so I think the archive is uh, it's really remarkable because it is this living thing. And I think that archives are oftentimes very much like knowledge that's kind of fixed in place. And when we're thinking about landscape and ecology and all of these themes around um, time scales that are beyond us and kind of intention with these more conventional ways of spatial practice that kind of have dominated the field. Um, I think there's a lot of opportunity for kind of rethinking a little bit of that. And the archive, I think, is a really, um, yeah, just a really inspiring framework for doing that.
Maybe building on that. I teach maybe, well, firstly, it was a really critical process for me to sort of delve into the archive, to sort of not only understand sort of my, well, firstly, my, like to be super direct, to understand my hunches of what I was experiencing and feeling in an academic environment, and then understand the systems that were oppressing and sort of so delving going back into the archive and understanding the systems and sort of actually the repeated sort of behaviors that were being sort of occurring and continue to occur within the discipline. So it was actually um, super important in ways that the understanding, the same way that we sort of talk about sort of the grounds that we work on, that they're not sort of terra nullius, they're not sort of vacant. Our sort of knowledge systems are not, terra nullius either, or the grounds that we work within are not erased or sort of coming from, a space of new ground. And so it was actually a way of me building this ground or understanding this ground that I was working within. And it's something that I also get students to engage with. So when we sort of formulate a site, it's about sort of understanding it through the archive as a means for constructing ground to understand actually the trauma and harm of the grounds that we're actually working within and the systems that have actually suppressed and marginalized people and communities.
Going off that, I kind of want to ask, I guess, like how you see landscape or land itself having potential to be something we can read histories in that can be an archive in its own way. Kari, you were showing those photos where you could, in the park in Copenhagen, where you could see the lush planting that was there before, and then just the kind of patches of exposed soil. And then Rose, you were just talking too about like literally things have been erased and that there is a trauma in the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is um, at least there's a lot of these histories in the landscape and how things evolve over time that I don't think our profession values or likes to capture or showcase. I think you think about it in like a design project, even like when like a firm showcases their work, it's always like very glossy images at the end, but it doesn't necessarily um like go through the process of like documenting maintenance, removal, like spontaneity, like messiness or like these like contradictions that happen over time. It's kind of like it like ends where the designer says it ends, which is like kind of removing this agency from the site itself and from everything and all of these other actors that are um making this a very rich place. Um so I think yeah, that would be one thing I would say. And like in that um in Abney Park and in the park in Copenhagen, um, you kind of yeah, you see the transformation of a place that like had a richness that wasn't recognized, that was then transformed to be something else that was, claimed to be like this is desirable. Um, and so I think like making those histories more visible, um, and then also highlighting like um, when those histories that are like we see in a park something that's, fallen into a state of mismanagement or decay, and that is usually seen as like this isn't this isn't productive, but like something really rich is happening outside of it. So kind of opening opportunities for um like uncertainty into these sites and into these landscapes, and just like allowing for a little bit of like experimentation, um and like humility maybe. Yeah.
Like I see Shayna hitting the in the call. Hi, Shayna. Um, and I think it'd be like Shayna. I'm sure you've got many thoughts, and this is part of your practice as well. Um, and you sort of like practice in multiple ways. Uh, how do you see it sort of being relevant to your work? I'm picking on Shayna.
I'm sorry. It was really nice to see you and Kari. I really appreciate both presentations. Very thought-provoking. I was actually, and Elaine, I really liked the question you asked. I actually wrote it down about landscape and land and also reading histories. In my work, I think a lot critically about what does it mean to read the landscape against itself, and how do we see what is absent by what is present, and then the amount of time and care that it requires to engage beyond what is in front of us, and also what are the narratives of official histories that we are expected to see or engage versus these hidden histories, both of violence and also of different ways of reimagining futures. And so I was thinking, so I'm sorry, I'm just thinking a lot. I feel like what do you call it?
Yes.
Like acupuncture, like you get several pins at one time, and so many things was brought up in both presentations. But thinking for me a lot about how I actually was going to ask this as a question, like what does it mean to read the landscape critically in your work? And it Rose, I feel like you put me on the spot to respond to. But I'm thinking a lot about like so to me it's, and also the relationship between that is which is speculative, that's not overly romanticized, but how to think about ways in which for me and some of my work are related to looking at runaway slave ads and narratives, and how what was the landscape? How did people have to read the landscape critically to navigate, to move in ways that are to move in plain sight without being seen? And also to think about what does that look like today in a contemporary, um, for example, in women organizing in public housing, how they had to read their landscape or read the architecture differently as a platform for resistance outside of what it was designed to contain a whole. And thinking about the broader question about a feminist spatial practice, um, how to think about those that level of care and attention to detail that doesn't also reinscribe the ways in which we are constantly having to do the work, right? I feel like even like there's the level of care, but we always are taken care of, right? And so what is that burden? How do we share that responsibility? That also goes beyond moving beyond the superficial, thinking about critiquing what is progress and how to think about progress differently, how to think about decay differently, how to think about the like our planetary engagement differently, thinking about the canon in which we both move in and out of, and also that's confining us at the same time, right? So it's a lot of random thoughts. Um, Thank you all for letting me just blurt just now.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah, and Actually, I think we can just start talking more about maybe what's showing up on the Figma board. And, this is an open discussion. So if anyone wants to ask something, or Avery, if you want to maybe point to something that's shown up in the Figma board now that we could start with.
Sure. I think most of them are from me. So while we go talk about the ones I did, anyone else can feel free to add their own threads. Up here, I was really inspired by what Kari was talking about, and I was thinking about guerrilla gardening and just how communities really like claim agency over their space that is kind of theirs and makes, sometimes it's community gardens in the Lower East Side in New York. Sometimes it's Ron Finley going and planting on the curbsides in Los Angeles. So I think that's really what I was thinking about, like embracing messiness and what Kari was kind of talking about, like how do we give agency back to the land? And there are community groups that are already doing that. And so I think that's something that I was like thinking about in both of your presentations was this like tension between like order that we've seen all the way back into Olmsted and then the how do we embrace messiness as feminist practitioners and how do we do that in a way that gives agency back to the land and back to communities. So I don't know if that's kind of what I've been thinking about. If you all want to respond to that or talk about how you do that in your own practice, like what's our call to action? How do we do that as feminist practitioners?
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I love the image of the like the street with the kind of overgrown um everything like growing onto the sidewalk. I think that's very it's funny like we across New York I feel like you see places like this and like they are very rich and a lot of communities like the aesthetic of this and it's like it has value to them and yet like that is in such contrast and like maintenance says like you can't have something that looks like this because it's not like orderly. It doesn't like look like it's being maintained. But there is like a richness to a lot of these places where you see like I feel like a street down, there's like someone who like just kind of guerrilla plants like what they want in like the median outside of their apartment. Um and um yeah, so I think that's like a really beautiful example of like kind of this way of experimenting and like um just yeah, being in like contrast to what is considered like this is acceptable, this is how it should look because we've said like these are like the guidelines or whatever. So being in contradiction to that is yeah, really great.
I can comment briefly. Like, and I'll maybe take it from a pedagogical perspective, is that when we look at these images, they're sort of not only provoking sort of an understanding of, or the notion of professionalism and sort of labor, the relationship between those, that we begin to sort of understand a practice differently. That it's not just sort of confined into sort of what the way that we've conventionally sort of designed it or defined it. But then the other thing that it sort of provokes is that we begin to sort of transform the way that we might sort of not only understand the environment of the design studio and the extension of the spaces that it engages with, the way that we understand ecology differently. So we're transforming sort of the sort of knowledge systems that we're delivering and the understanding of that. But then, it also like, the way that we think about sort of even a workflow of a project. So that we're not thinking of it as the sort of design, the drawing set. The drawing set has sort of, in a way, the drawing set comes from Olmsted's legacy. The and the way that we sort of understand that as the sort of the way that so we can see it sort of continuing in the schools. But what does it mean to actually then reframe what a drawing set might be? What sort of, even the teaching of ecology or representation, like these systems that are so deeply entrenched in schools.
Yeah, I find that so relevant today. I was just thinking of drawing sets I was working on this morning where it's like this is so prescribed where drawing plants is like a very specifically sized circle, which is like completely wrong. Like it's just not what they are at all. Um, Avery, was there something else that we might want to look at here?
Um, Looks like some folks were looking into like HBCUs and how they also talking about what you were talking about, Rose, with like the Cambridge School, how they were sort of some of the first institutions that were really at the forefront of making sure that all voices are being incorporated in the design realm. Someone put Venturi Scott Brown's Bryn Mawr College campus. So how do we also rethink if we're taking something that was originally designed by Olmsted and then kind of queering it, adding our own sort of feminist touch to it, to a feminist school. So I think those were beautiful examples too. Um, but yeah, I think this has been amazing. I'm excited to figure out how to embrace the pause, how to, go beyond frameworks and beyond, the like drawing sets. So I feel very inspired. I hope everyone else does too. Uh, Thank you both for being here, and thank you, Elaine, for organizing this amazing event. And yeah, this has been wonderful. Our first of many.
Yes, thank you. And we said earlier, everyone is welcome to contribute to the archive. Please do share anything that interests you that you see as a feminist spatial practice. We want this to be inclusive, to move across boundaries, disciplines. It should be an exciting and lively archive. And yes, this is the first of many, many events tracing threads through the archive. So thank you, Rose and Kari, for being our guinea pigs on trying to run this first event. And thank you, Avery, for helping to organize.
Yay.
And thank you all for joining.
Thank you all. The recording will be available probably within the next week. It's as soon as I get it and we get it uploaded. Thanks for everyone attending. And to Ariella, our amazing intern who really helped. Have a good day, y'all. Yay.